1470.
1470.
WNN.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. The content of the following program, including all statements from the host and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by a host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program should not be viewed as a substitute for personal consultation with an attorney. Welcome to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, who brings you all the latest news in the legal world. Jeff will be discussing a variety of legal topics with experts in the field. If you would like to ask a question or share a story on the air, please call toll-free 888-565-1470. Once again, that's 888-565-1470. Now, let's talk legal with Jeff Van Treese.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Talk Legal. I'm your host, Jeff Van Treese. I'm an attorney with the law firm Oltman, Flynn & Kubler, where we specialize in intellectual property, including patents, trademarks, and copyrights, as well as elder law. You can find out more by visiting us online at oltmanpatent.com. That's OLTMANPATENT.com. You can also view all episodes of this show on our website. I'd also like to acknowledge our other sponsor, Fresh Start Tax. Fresh Start Tax offers a full range of accounting services, including basic tax returns, as well as assistance with tax levies, wage garnishments, and any other tax-related concern. You can find out more by visiting their website, freshstarttax.com. I'd like to thank all of our listeners this evening, including those of you tuning in on the AM dial, as well as those watching online. If you have a question, comment, or story that you would like to share on the air, please feel free to call us toll-free at 888-565-1470. Once again, that toll-free number is 888-565-1470. We welcome your calls. I have a special guest in studio this evening. His name is Warren Redlich. Warren is a criminal defense attorney, and he also practices personal injury law. In addition to that, Warren is the creator and editor of the online news periodical Westspoken News, and I've contributed to that website on a number of occasions. This evening, we're going to be discussing a recap of some of the legal stories and crime stories that have occurred in this year, 2014, as we're wrapping up the year. And Warren has written a number of crime stories on his news periodical. So, Warren, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Warren was on also a few weeks ago where we were discussing DUIs, and we were discussing his book, Fair DUI. So, Warren, you feel pretty passionate about the lack of prosecution of serious crimes from our state attorney's office in Palm Beach County.
Sure.
So I know that you've written about this quite extensively. So if you give us an introduction to this issue.
Well, first of all, it's not just Palm Beach County. My impression of it is that it's Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, that the three counties in South Florida are what people would refer to as soft on crime, or soft on what I think is the crimes that I think are important. You know, burglary, robbery, violent crimes are things that I think should be the main focus of prosecution, the main focus of policing. I think my view on where they're soft sometimes is shared by, I've talked to people in the sheriff's department who feel that way. I've talked to, cops who feel that way. The impression I have is if you get north of Palm Beach County, you get into Martin County, St. Lucie County, that they're tougher, that there are other counties in the state where they're tougher. And so I feel strongly that, and I just see it from my work, from Westspoken News is a passion of mine now. It's something that we started a couple of years ago, and it's doing really well with residents in Boca Raton and Westpoke in particular. And I cover crime stories. And there is there's a crime problem. Now, Boca Raton and Westpoke in particular actually have a lower crime problem than most of the rest of the county, and Palm Beach County has a lesser crime problem than Broward or Miami-Dade. So it's not a bad crime problem like, say, Belle Glade or Riviera Beach or, Miami, but there's a crime problem here. And there's certain patterns that I've noticed in reporting stories. When I want to look into a story, I see somebody was arrested for something, I will look on the court websites for the three counties to see what's that person's criminal history. And I was surprised. I think the first time, I don't remember the name of the case or when it was, but there was a carjacking on Federal Highway. And I think the police ended up killing the carjacker. And I'm looking up the history of the guy who's the guy who was killed, the carjacker. And he'd been arrested something like 40 times. And like, it's one of those things, I think people get tired of hearing I'm from New York and this is the way we do things up in New York. I'm not from New York City. I'm from Albany, New York, which is kind of like being from Tallahassee. And there's a way that things are done in Albany, New York that's actually different than how it's done in New York City. And you just didn't, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. You just didn't see people with 40 arrests. You wouldn't get there. You after 3, 4, 5 arrests, at a certain point, you're done. There's a, and that's kind of the way people in upstate New York would talk. Is like, he's done. That's it. And you see people with multiple cases in this system, and it gets to the point where it's like, no, that at some point, as the prosecutor, you have to say, no, we can't let this go anymore. First offense, teenager, 22-year-old, whatever, has a first offense. They were shoplifting. They had a DUI, something that most people would say is relatively minor compared to violent crime. All right, that person gets a break, and we get them some counseling, and we drop the case. And then second offense, all right, we're still going to give him a break, but it's not as good. And now he's going to get a probation. He's going to have to check in with a probation officer once a week for a year or 2 or maybe 3 years. You get to the third offense, you cross that line to where it's like, okay, this guy's not just an ordinary problem, who's a regular guy who's having a bad day. This is a guy who's demonstrating a pattern of problems. And now you're starting to look at jail sentences and it's kind of like a ladder. It goes up a ladder. First offense, you're at the bottom. Every time you have an offense, you go up the ladder. A more serious offense, you take a bigger jump up the ladder. So I think the other one that stood out to me early on when I noticed this was there was an incident at a Subway on Glades Road just west of the Turnpike where these two guys, there's a guy who's, I don't know if he's working on security cameras. He's doing something at the Subway, some kind of vendor contractor doing some kind of work there. And these two guys jump him.
And of course, this is a Subway restaurant.
Subway restaurant, yes. Right. Yes. There's a sandwich restaurant. I'm not even 100% sure it was a Subway, but I think it was a Subway restaurant on the south side of Glades Road near Lyons Road. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's about where it was. So these two guys jump him and beat him up. And it's a father and son who are administering the beating. So I see the story. They got arrested for battery or aggravated battery, whatever it was. And I go and I look up their histories. And each father and son have both been arrested like 20 times. And the daughter, the TV stations picked up this story a little bit. And they interview the daughter. And she's like on TV saying, it was just an ass whooping. That's what men do. Something like that. She like, no, that's not what men do.
Right.
I'm watching it like, no, you're not supposed to beat people up. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And I feel, and the fact that these guys have been in and out of, the criminal justice system 20 times each, and they've gotten a clear message from our prosecutor's office and the court system, whatever, whoever's ultimately responsible. I personally think a lot of responsibility goes on the state's attorney's office, but there's, other places you could place blame. School systems, another place you could place blame. That's another conversation. But they've been delivered the message repeatedly: commit crimes and you will get away with it. We will allow, you'll have minimal consequences for your crimes, which is a contrast from upstate New York, where if you commit these kinds of crimes, third, fourth time, all of a sudden it's like, you're going to be gone for a year. And then you come back and it happens again. Now you're gone for 3 years. And, the message is delivered very clearly that this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated. And we're going to investigate it. We're going to get the details. We're going to prosecute you and you're going to go away. And if that's the message that gets out, then people with that tendency to commit crimes, everybody has some, nobody's perfect. We all have some flaws in us and some flaws within us. And we all have some tendencies. And we all have that, if you drive in Boca Raton, you're going to have a homicidal moment where you want to kill somebody. You can't drive in Boca Raton or South Florida for very long without wanting to kill somebody. But, most of us don't do that. We may have the thought once in a while, but we never, of course, actually carry it out. But there are people who are more prone to committing crimes, and we are sending a message to those people through our criminal justice system and through other, like the school system. We are sending the message, you can commit crimes and you will get away with it. And I think it's not just the state's attorney, but there are attitudes that people have. That someone who makes, I had an experience recently on West Boca News where I did a story about an accident. And one of our readers had sent me a photo that if you looked really close, you could kind of see the outline of what looked like a dead body. It wasn't a really good photo. You couldn't really tell. You couldn't see a face. You could kind of see the legs. And a couple times I've done stories, and I put warnings in the article, hey, there's a photo that might bother you. Don't scroll down if you don't want to see it. And a number of people objected, saying that was in poor taste, that was something we shouldn't do, blah, blah, blah. And okay, that's fine. Don't read West Boca News if you don't want to see that. It's my attitude. But some people sometimes make violent threats, and somebody made a violent threat about my head getting dented or something along those lines. And I posted that on West Boca News on our Facebook page, just ask people for a vote. Which do you think is more disturbing? Us posting a photo on an article with all the warnings about a photo with a dead body in it, or somebody making a violent threat? And there's a lot of people who think the violent threat is not such a big deal.
You know, I think it's interesting because we have this concept in the law called mens rea, which is the degree of intent involved with a crime. If an act is premeditated, it's considered worse than if an act is not premeditated. For example, if somebody's negligent or reckless and causes somebody else injury, the crimes you're describing are intentional. These
Yes.
are assault, battery. These are premeditated acts of violence.
Yes.
And people that commit these premeditated intentional acts would appear to be a greater danger to society than anyone else.
Yeah.
So this really is something that I'm very surprised the prosecutors are not taking into consideration. And it just sort of begs the question, why is this happening?
So what I think should be going on, or what I think is going on, or what isn't going on, is whenever you have an office like that, it could be an ER, right, and patients are coming in, or your prosecutor's office and cases are coming in, you have to do something called triage. You have to decide what's serious, what's not serious. Let's devote more resources and quicker resources and address more quickly the serious case. And this other case can wait or can get a lower priority, or maybe we can shift it off to something else. You know, this one doesn't deserve our attention as much as that one. So I think a good example to me is something that triage would say we shouldn't focus on is low-level marijuana cases. I mean, and we've talked about this before, I think, but I'm a libertarian. I don't think marijuana should be illegal at all. But just practically speaking, somebody who's caught with marijuana is not really a major threat to anyone. And that's not something I would make a priority, and I would not waste a lot of resources on a case like that versus focusing on somebody who's committed a premeditated violent act or a premeditated property crime. There was I think one of the fears, just from living in West Boca and talking to neighbors over the I've only been here 3 years, but over the 3 years I've been here, I've definitely picked up on a fairly widespread perception that we aren't really that safe in our homes, and that our homes are at risk of being burglarized. You know, and I live in a gated community, for example, and people live in gated communities to some extent have a perception they're a little safer, but of course they're not perfectly safe. No matter what you do, you can't be perfectly safe. And there was just an incident maybe 3 weeks ago where there was it's a high-end neighborhood called the Oaks on Clint Moore near 441 and between 441 and Lyons. And they had a home invasion where somebody jumped over the wall or climbed over the wall, whatever, on Lyons Road, and they had their sliding glass door open. This guy came in with a gun. It's not supposed to happen in a place like the Oaks, but it does. Do you need to take a break or something?
In about a minute or so.
Okay.
Just finish that story.
So the point is that we have this fear, in our neighborhood. A lot of people have alarm systems on their houses. I have an alarm system on my house. Why do I have an alarm system on my house? I live in a gated community in a wealthy suburban area. Well, because there's a perception that there's a real crime problem, because there is a real crime problem. And we can change that. We can make people feel safer in their homes if we prosecute violent criminals and property criminals and get the message out to that community of people. You're going to pay consequences if you do this.
Very interesting. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back with Warren Redlick.
This program is brought to you by Fresh Start Tax. Fresh Start Tax offers a full range of tax and accounting services, including tax return preparation and bookkeeping, as well as back taxes, wage garnishments, unfiled returns, or any other tax-related concern. Our dedicated team of tax attorneys, CPAs, and former IRS agents offer over 60 years of professional tax experience. For a free consultation, call 866-700-1040. That's 866-700-1040. You can also visit us on the web at freshstarttax.com. This program is brought to you by the law firm of Altman, Flynn, and Kubler. Our law firm specializes in elder law and intellectual property, including patents, trademarks, and copyrights. If you would like to patent your idea, please contact our Fort Lauderdale office for a free consultation. We offer elder law services, including estate planning, long-term care planning, and preparation of healthcare documents. We strive to plan for your future needs while allowing you to retain as much dignity and independence as possible. To find out more or to make an appointment, call 954-563-4814. That's 954-563-4814. Or visit us online at oltmanpatent.com. That's OLTMANPATENT.com. Spokesperson, not an attorney. You're listening to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, who brings you all the latest news in the legal world. If you would like to ask a question or share a story on the air, please call toll-free 888-565-1470. Once again, that's 888-565-1470. Now, back to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese.
And we're back. My guest this evening is Warren Redlich. He's a criminal defense attorney, and he's also the editor of the online news periodical Westspoken News. Warren, I recently read an article on your website about a hit-and-run incident that occurred on 441 near Westspoken Medical Center, and the circumstances surrounding that were very unnerving. If you could tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that.
What happened was, first I got a friend of mine contacted me, hey, there's a bad accident out in front of Target, Westspoken Medical Center. So I drove over and took some pictures, shot some video, and I did a story on the accident scene. And there were, remnants of the people's, clothing or whatever in the roadway, and there were investigators who were marking off spots and doing their accident reconstruction work. So I did a story on that. And then I did a follow-up about a month later. No one had been arrested yet. The sheriff's office wouldn't tell me what was going on. I couldn't get more information, and I was just sort of saying, no progress in this case. And then another month later, I got the crash report. I think maybe the second story, they did identify who the driver was, but they still didn't give me more information. And then the third story was when they actually gave me the crash report, and I was able to see all the details they had. And the end of the crash report, it said this matter's been referred to the state's attorney's office, and that had been, 2 months before I'm reading this crash report. And no charges had been filed yet against the driver. His name's Brett Knowles. Lives in Boca Isles North, I think. So I'm reading this, and I'm doing stories on it. And my third story was state's attorney stalling on hit-and-run driver. And within a week, they actually charged the guys. I don't know, was it my story that forced their hand, or were they stalling for a reason, or were they going on their normal course? I don't know. But the thing about Knowles was he had a history of multiple driving with a suspended license cases with little or no consequences. And it's that thing I was talking about before, the ladder. I understand you get your first time, you're driving with a suspended license, okay, we'll go easy on you the first time, clean up your license, and we'll clean it up. The second time, you've demonstrated a disregard for the law, and that's not a good thing to drive with a suspended license, and now there's got to be consequences. Third time, it's got to go up. And the law provides a ladder. Second offense, third offense, persistent offender. There's a structure in the law to treat somebody with that kind of history more harshly as they get repeat offenses, but the state's attorney wasn't doing that. And then when around the time I wrote the second story, I didn't know this at the time, the guy had been pulled over with a suspended license after he'd had this incident, with a hit-and-run incident, and they charged him with driving the suspended license, and the state's attorney dropped the charge. And I should have mentioned one of the most objectionable things about this is after the incident and before I think when I wrote the second story, he had posted on his Facebook page a joke with the Geico, the gecko from the insurance company.
I saw that. That was
saying, and what it said was, I just saved a lot of money on car insurance. I backed away and left the scene. And he's accused of leaving the scene in this incident and driving with a suspended license, and he's mocking the incident on Facebook. That's how his attitude has been shaped about our system. So that's something I think we don't feel safe on our roads because there are dangerous drivers out there.
Now, in his potential trial, could that Facebook post be used as an admission?
Absolutely.
Right.
But that's the point is, assuming the state's attorney has the resources to be able to prove it, that he said it, that it's his account, all those other things, that's something they can do, but they have to have the mindset they're going to do it. And who knows whether they're really going to come down on him or not. I don't know. They have a history of not coming down on him and not coming down on other people with repeat driving with suspended license charges. At a certain point, you got to throw the book at people. You got to say, all right, now the consequences are real and you're going away for a year. And somebody who goes away for 3 days doesn't feel the same consequences as somebody who goes away for a year. You've got to get the message out. This isn't going to be tolerated. You're going to pay consequences for it. So I think that's a hot story. I think people should care about it. I think people should pay attention to it. Are they going to hold them accountable?
Yes, very unnerving story. I'd like to get your thoughts on the recent tragedy in New York, the 2 officers that were killed. There's been some dissension amongst the New York Police Officers Union and the mayor. To me, it looks like this was sort of a random act. This individual here appears to have had some serious mental issues. I don't really see the connection with the city hall and the mayor's office. What do you think of all of this discord that's going on?
To start, I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I tend to lean towards defendants sometimes, but I also have a lot of friends who are cops, and I'm sympathetic to both sides. And I do see and I'm also involved with organizations concerned about police abuses. Photography is not a crime is one of them, and Honor Your Oath is another one that I advise these guys as their attorney sometimes, or I participate with them in some events. So I'm critical of policing at times, although usually my focus is not the individual police officers, but rather the policies that bureaucracy and politics puts on the police. But as far as the mayor goes, look, obviously the person responsible is the guy who shot them. I think a lot of police officers feel that the mayor, and not just the mayor, but the protesters and maybe Obama holder, whatever, that those people are not backing up the cops. That you'll have an incident like the Ferguson incident, right, where Michael Brown was shot by, I forget the name of the police officer who shot him now. Darren Wilson, is that his name?
That's the name, yeah.
Okay. And the media came down on the cop right away. And my opinion, the Obama administration was not sufficiently supportive of the police officer. As I know the facts as I've seen the facts now, to me, there's little question in my mind that it was a justified shooting. But from what I've seen, now, I'm not saying that the grand jury was conducted properly or anything else, but from the facts that I've seen, I don't buy the story that this was an innocent, gentle giant. That this guy was a bad guy who just burglarized, robbed a store. Okay, he was a rough guy, and he was dangerous. And I'm not in the police officer's shoes. I wasn't there, but there's a perception. I think police officers have a perception that the government officials should get behind them immediately whenever something like this happens. And definitely there was a feeling after the incident in Staten Island, which he got to admit is hard to defend from the police standpoint. What happened? It's not really clear why he went for a chokehold.
Well, that was one of the biggest differences between the 2 cases. Is in the Eric Garner case, there was a video. It was being recorded as it happened, and so you have a much better idea of what happened there versus what transpired between Darren Wilson and Michael Brown in Ferguson.
Yeah. But even with the Staten Island case, I don't think what the police officer did was right. But I think people want to shift the blame for what happened there, and they don't want to accept where the real responsibility for that incident is. There's a cigarette tax. It's like $6 a pack or something like that, and Eric Garner was selling loose cigarettes and avoiding the cigarette tax, right? And that's he's basically evading taxes. So there is a liberal policy, and I'm sorry, I got criticisms of conservative policies too, like the drug war, but there is a liberal policy of taxing cigarettes. That is a liberal, progressive policy to put heavy taxes on cigarettes to discourage people from smoking. And when you pass a law like that, when you have a tax like that it ultimately has to be enforced by people. Somebody has to enforce it, usually armed men who use force. Ultimately, at some point, there's going to be a use of force to enforce your policy. So if we didn't have cigarette taxes, Eric Garner would be alive today. And a lot of drug war, a lot of people are killed in the drug war. Didn't stop Philip Seymour Hoffman from dying from heroin, didn't stop the guy on Glee from dying from heroin, doesn't seem to stop any school kid who wants it from getting drugs. But we have this policy, and people get killed in the drug war all the time. That's a conservative. Originally, it's progressive policy banning drugs, but it's currently a conservative policy. Doesn't work. The fault in this is not, I don't like blaming the cops for these incidents, because when you adopt a policy that you're going to have cops make mistakes, cops do exceed their authority. And the way to prevent that best is to stop putting too much on the cops' shoulders. That's something that I think is missing.
We had a special on this last week, and I've been asking my guests for the last few weeks about this case. What jumps out at me the most was when Eric Garner was saying he couldn't breathe and he was down on the ground. Watching the tape, it just didn't look like he was much of a threat, and it seemed like there was a very high risk to his health if he's saying that he can't breathe. What are your thoughts on that? And since you do personal injury, I'm curious what you think about a potential civil action that might follow.
Oh, I'm sure his family's going to make a civil action against the city, and the city's going to pay his family a lot of money. I mean, there's no. It looks to me like ultimately the thing is, the police officer used what looked like a chokehold, and there really didn't seem to be a reason for him to do that. And as I understand it, maybe against department policy, so they're going to get some money. I think it's pretty clear that what they did was wrong. As far as the I can't breathe, and I'm not sure what the cause of death is yet. As I understand it, he died an hour later. So it's not like he suffocated on the spot right there and was dead right there. He was taken to the hospital. He just weighed 400 pounds. And he had cardiac problems. You know, maybe they accelerated when he was going to die, you know, by weeks, months, years. But he wasn't in good health anyway. So I just don't know. I mean, I still think what the police officer did was wrong. But
well, I'm sure the debate over this issue is going to continue for some time to come. I have just about a minute left. I'd like to give a very special thanks to my guest, Warren Redlich. Warren, if you could tell our listeners where they can find you and also where they can find your book, Fair DUI.
Sure. The main place I'm active now is on West Boca News, westbocanews.com. If you Google West Boca News, you should find us. Fair DUI is a book I wrote about how to protect yourself from the world gone mad. And that's on Amazon, and the title is FAIR DUI, and it's fairdui.org.
It's a great book, by the way. I have to endorse it. Thank you so much for listening. Tune in next week, Tuesday night from 6 to 6:30, where my guest will be Penter Holmes. We'll be doing another recap of the legal news from this past year. I'm your host, Jeff Van Treese. This has been Talk Legal. Thanks so much. Happy holidays, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you for listening to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese. Tune in next week for more insightful and exciting information about the law. You can contact Jeff by email at jvt2law@gmail.com or give him a call at 561-789-6866. That's 561-789-6866. The content of the preceding program